Welcome everyone to WyoSports video blog first presentation as we take a look at Wyoming's football game with the Air Force Falcons this Saturday at 8:15 at War Memorial Stadium. I'm joined by Robert Gagliardi, Senior WyoSports Editor and University of Wyoming football beat writer. I am Scott Nulph, WyoSports Editor. Robert, before we get into the Air Force game, let's take a quick look back at the Montana game last week. Just your final takeaway on how Wyoming played and what you thought of their performance on Saturday.
I think the bottom line, Scott, is that Wyoming got a win. You know, it was a close game. It wasn't a pretty game at times, but I think this was a game that Wyoming probably loses last year when it faced adversity, when it turned the ball over a couple times in the second half, even couldn't get things going early in the third quarter. They made some defensive stops, got the run game going, and was just able to find a way to get a win, and even getting some defensive stops later in the game. I'm not sure if Wyoming would have been able to handle that type of adversity. Even though the deficit on the scoreboard wasn't significant, I'm not sure if that team last year would have won that game. But they need obviously a lot of improvement to be made, but the run game was solid, the defense was solid. Like I said, it's not always going to be pretty with this football team this year, but I think just overcoming adversity and making a few plays when it did were enough for them to get a win, and a very important win for the first game in the Craig Bowl era.
Would you say maybe the two biggest areas of concern, maybe at quarterback on how Colby Kierkegaard played overall with the turnovers a little bit, and maybe the offensive line and the fact that the pass protection probably wasn't where they wanted it to be?
That's probably fair. You know, I think, you know, Colby Kierkegaard, look, this was his second start ever, basically his second game, meaningful games in his career, and he's been here for 4 years, so there's probably some jitters. I thought he got off to a good start. I think he only, had only one incompletion through the first quarter, got off to a good start. Then he had the fumble in the second quarter and the interception in the end zone. Other than that, I thought Colby showed really good poise. And getting back to the adversity point, he came back after that, and they didn't let that get to him. So protection was an issue, although I know, a couple of those, obviously the sack on the fumble was a bad one, but a couple times they took a knee. I know when I talked to Brent Vegan, the offensive coordinator, this week, he said there were really only two. There were 6 sacks in the game. Right. Only 2, from what he counted, were really like coverage sacks. Right. So again, but that still has to improve. And to say that Colby Kierkegaard doesn't need to improve would be false. Obviously, he needs to play better, and Wyoming needs to be better, more efficient in the pass game. 209 yards rushing, really closer to 240 when you take sack yardage away. But 92 passing, that has to be more balanced for this team to be effective through the season.
I think so too. But I think overall, as Craig Bowl said after the game, a win is what was, I think, most vitally important to this program to kind of get that feeling back, feel positive about themselves and moving forward. So let's move forward. Let's talk about the Air Force game this Saturday. One of the first things right off the bat is always the intriguing thing when Wyoming and Air Force meet early is that first conference game very early in the season. What are the challenges that both teams will face playing a conference game second week of the season?
Well, I think just obviously the importance of, granted, one conference game isn't going to win you or lose you a conference title, but it's still the first conference game. And, especially with a new staff like Wyoming, they're still trying to get the feel of the players and vice versa and get everything down. Now you throw a conference game on top of it in your second game, and there's obviously some added importance there. So, and Air Force, kind of the same. Now they've been in the same system for a while, same coaches. It's not like they got that big of a transition, but it's still important. And in Mountain Division, I think a lot of people think, look, it's Boise, Utah State, look what Colorado State did. We're early in the season, but if you're going to, be a factor in this, these are games, whether you're Wyoming or Air Force, I'm sure both teams feel this way, that this is a game you've got to get. So it kind of amps up the emotion, it amps up the intensity, and it kind of amps up the sense of urgency, I think, for both teams.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that both teams wanted to come into this season feeling better about themselves than what happened last year. Certainly Air Force had, by all accounts, maybe one of the worst seasons they've had in a long, long time at 2-10. Wyoming wasn't a whole lot better at 5-7. So I think the first team to get to a 2-0 start, I think, will be feeling really good about itself. Let's look at the game now. I get the feeling I was able to get on with the Air Force conference call yesterday and listen to what they had to say. I think we're going to see some old-fashioned football here on Saturday. Old-style football, running. Maybe first team to 300 rushing yards wins in this game, isn't it?
Right, and it may be one of the quickest games ever. If both teams run the ball like they plan it as an 8:15 deadline, as journalists, as newspaper guys, that's the earlier the better. But I do think, this Air Force is about option football, and they can call their offense multiple, call it what they want. They're still based out of option concepts. So we're going to see a lot of We're going to see a lot of running the football. Now, what makes Air Force dangerous is the pass game out of that with the play action or something. And it sounds like in senior quarterback Cale Pearson, he can throw the ball. Now, they didn't throw it against Nichols. They only threw it 6 times, but they didn't need to. And probably they weren't wanting to show a lot in their game book or their to see what they can do. But you got to watch that. But look, just like we said against Montana, the Wyoming has to throw the ball better. They still have got to run the ball. Look, this is what this team's identity is running the football and being physical. They've got to get that established. So it kind of could be a lot of old school football on Saturday night, and that could be a lot of fun. And honestly, I think it's going to be a great game, but the quicker to get over, the better for all of us.
I agree with that. Wyoming, as you mentioned, ran for almost 240 yards if you take away the sack yardage. Sean Wick and DJ May had great games. I thought the offensive line had great games. For me, what I thought was maybe the most impressive thing is running between the tackles. Because it feels like anybody can run on the edges. You get a seam on the edge, you break a big run.
Sure.
But the way they were able to run inside the tackles, and especially late in the game, that last drive, 5 minutes to go, you're up 5. They move the ball all the way down to the Montana 10-yard line. I think that bodes well for this offense. Granted, it was an FCS defense, but a pretty darn good FCS defense that they did that against.
And a good FCS defensive front, and you talked about it's like imposing your will on a team, and nothing can break the will of any team, any sport for that matter, but especially in football when it's, like you said, Scott, late in the game, you know what's coming.
Right.
Montana knew what was coming. In fact, was it Sean Wick in the post-game interviews with us after the game said, we could hear their guys saying they're going to run the ball, they're going to run the ball, and Wyoming did, and they still were able to run the clock out and get first down. So that was a big, important first step. So I was impressed with that. Now, against Air Force, it's a little different beast. They run a 3-man front, which you don't see a lot anymore in football.
Right.
Their linemen are generally smaller. Doesn't mean they're not good. They're just smaller, but they're going to bring linebackers and bring pressures and different stunts, not just pass blitzes, but run blitzes from a lot of different angles. So that'll be a new challenge for this Wyoming offensive line. I like their physicality against Montana. Still think they've got a ways to go there. But it's not just going to be about they're stacking 8 guys in the box. The Air Force might line guys close to the box, but they're going to come from different angles to try to stop them. And how can Wyoming get a hat on a hat? If they're able to do that, you would think with their size advantage, that should be able to be an advantage. If you can't get a hat on a guy because of their athleticism, because of their quickness, and because of coming from various angles, that could pose a problem.
Yeah. Now let's flip the ball. Wyoming, through the years, feels like it's done a good job against the Air Force option. They seem to be able to, whatever it is, assignment football, whatever you want to call it, that you have to do man-on-man foot defense. What does this Wyoming team have to do in particular Saturday to stop this option? Is it the first part of the option? Is it the fullback? Is that a key to stopping an option offense, is making sure they can't hand off to the fullback?
Well, I think that's a big part of it. And again, we'll see various looks from this, but the fullback's a factor. And last year, really, the fullback wasn't much of a factor for Air Force, but Shane Devern is a new fullback. He's a converted linebacker for them, 240 pounds. Now, it's not like he had huge numbers against Nichols. No one, other than Jacoby Owens, the running back, no one had huge numbers for Air Force last week. But the Wyoming coaching staff feels pretty confident that this fullback can be a difference maker in a game like this. So I think you got to stop that up the middle, because how many times have we seen over the past when Air Force will, whether they're playing Wyoming or they're playing anyone, they'll just kind of go, then all of a sudden the fullback pops a big one up the middle. So I think it starts with the fullback, but it also starts with the quarterback as well. There's just so many things in this type of offense, that they have to do, and I know it sounds simple. You've probably heard this a million times, but it is assignment-oriented football. Any game is that way, but especially this one. And it's going to be interesting to me because basically all 11 starters for Wyoming's defense has played against Air Force and had some success. Okay, and 9 of those starters are seniors.
Right.
So a lot of them have seen not just a little bit; they've played a lot against Air Force. So I think that advantage of seeing them helps them. But they're still learning their new defense here with defensive coordinator Steve Stannard in the 4-3. Now, Coach Stannard obviously has experience, longtime assistant at Colorado State, played Air Force a lot in the Fisher DeBerry year, so he knows all about this. But it's still Wyoming's system doing this. This isn't the Chris Tormey or the other staff system. This is their system and learning their keys to that. So that'll be interesting. I think it helps Wyoming. They have advantage. Experience advantage on defense seeing this, but it's still their new defense, only their second game in this. So that'll be interesting to see how that works.
Yeah, and I think they looked pretty good in that first game, but you're right, this is a whole different animal. I guess finally let's talk about the rivalry. And it has really ramped up the last couple of years. You got to admit it. 2 years ago, we know what happened with Dave Christensen on the field. I don't think he was really terribly out of line. I mean, he thought that Air Force was doing some unscrupulous tactic of having a player lay down for an injury. Last year, Wyoming went up there. And I won't say they ran up the score. They beat them up. But after the game, and what Air Force players talked about this week was during their third verse song, in which it's a song to honor all the fallen military veterans, the Wyoming band played the fight song during that. It all kind of adds into what's really developing, I think, into a top rivalry in the area. I know that for Wyoming, Colorado State's always going to be their number one. For Air Force, Army and Navy are always going to be their number one. But I think both sides feel if there's a 1B somewhere, it's this team. Don't you agree?
Oh, I would definitely agree. I mean, the things that make a rivalry, obviously, probably proximity to each other. We've got that with Wyoming and Air Force. Obviously, what makes another one is beating each other. You know, Air Force has an advantage in the series, but it's like 27-22 with a handful of ties or whatever. So there's teams have beaten each other. It's not lopsided or anything. Now you throw in a little of this, maybe not necessarily on the field, but kind of this off the field stuff, as you mentioned with Dave Christensen a couple years ago, and stuff last year. Also during the game last year when Naomi Konkalango had the big special teams hit. I know that got Wyoming's bench going. Now he was penalized. It was a helmet-to-helmet hit and stuff. Those are the types of things that really can make good rivalries. And I think the Wyoming Air Force series has always been a good one. I think it's been there's been a lot of respect, and I do feel there's still a lot of respect there. But I think with a couple of these things that have happened over the last couple of years, to say it's turning into a bitter rivalry would be a stretch. But the rivalry itself is gaining more momentum among the two schools, I think, and. Honestly, with all the shakeup that we've seen in the Mountain West over the years, this is actually, in my opinion, turning into one of the better rivalries in the Mountain West Conference. I
do too, and especially just in games played. I mean, how many games have been decided, whether it's 10-9 or 2 years ago here in Laramie, 28-27 Air Force. Close games add to it, like you said. The chippiness adds to it. I just think this has turned into a game that I think both fan bases really cherish to see when the game comes around. All right, let's pick a final score. 8:15, late kickoff, folks. Get your rest early. It's going to be a late night. What do you think is going to happen? What do you predict as a final score on Saturday?
I think that it's going to be a very run-oriented game, but I think there's going to be a handful of big plays in the pass game. Now, I'm not sure which teams are going to execute those, but I think the teams that do are going to have a chance to win. So I'm going to go with the home team. I'm going to go Wyoming in another close one. 20-16.
Okay. I think it's going to be the same way. I don't think it will be a high-scoring game. I think that Wyoming will be able to get some big plays. The one thing Nichols State did do last week against Air Force was get a couple big plays in their offense. But I'm going along the same lines. I think it's going to be 23-20 Wyoming. Maybe Wyoming have to make a stop again at the end, but I think it's going to be a great game and a great atmosphere. I hope the fan base comes out. I know it's a late game, but this is one of the games you should circle on your schedule every year. I think whether you're Wyoming or Air Force. So.
Absolutely.
Well, Robert, the band's about ready to get playing, so I think it's time for us to get out of here.
It's time to go. So this is wrap up our segment of the WyoSports Wyoming Football video blog. Thank you for joining us, and for more Wyoming coverage, be sure to check out WyoSports.net and also check out the Wyoming Tribune, Eagle and Cheyenne, and the Laramie Boomerang. Thank you very much. Enjoy the game, everybody.